Tonight, our focus is on humanism in action in the West Midlands. So it's a chance to celebrate all of the humanist practitioners and volunteers that we've got in the West Midlands, and also to encourage more people to become more active if they feel able to do so. It's not about pressurising you to do anything you don't want to do, but it's helping us all to think about what we might want to do, either on a small or a large scale, and tackling any fears or barriers that might be holding us back to doing more as humanists. So we're going to hear from 5 humanist practitioners who are each going to give a brief overview of their area of practice. So we're going to hear about being representative on a SACRE, which is the bodies that determine the content of the RE curriculum within each local authority. We're going to hear about school speaking, about dialogue work, pastoral care, and about being a celebrant. So we've asked all of our speakers are only going to talk for 5 minutes, which is quite a challenge, but they're going to do their best to stick to their 5 minutes. It's hard to cover everything they want to say in 5 minutes. So it's just about giving you a flavour of what they do and an insight into the process of becoming a practitioner, and also about hearing what people personally get out of it and the kind of personal benefits that come with being active in that way. So after we've had our speakers, there'll be a chance to ask questions through the chat as usual. And we want you to kind of have a think and go away and hopefully feel inspired to do something slightly more than what you do now, okay? But it's not just about being one of those practitioner roles. We also want to celebrate and thank everybody who's active in their local groups. So local groups can't work without active volunteers. And there are lots of different ways to become more active in your group, either as a committee member or in a different role, such as helping with social media, helping to organise events, or as a befriender to new members. I know every group operates slightly differently, so please do take the opportunity to find out how things work in other groups, to talk to people from your own groups, think about different things that you can that you might be able to do. Okay, so my Wi-Fi is a little bit patchy, so if I disappear, I shall let Simon take over. But for now, I'm going to hand over to our very first speaker. And our first speaker, if you would like to unmute, is Jane Sault.
Okay, so hi everyone. Yes, I'm Jane. Thank you for the introduction, Sarah. I've been a member of the Warwickshire SACRE for a few years. Had my arm twisted by the previous person who was leaving to live in Essex. So I'm sure you all know SACRE stands for Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. And amongst other things, the council determines the RE syllabus for the county or whatever local authority is involved. Now, why am I doing this tonight? Well, I want to try and encourage particularly anyone out there who is from those counties and authorities that are in red, because currently they have no humanist representative on their local SACRE. And thank you, Simon, for sending me that list. So I've been a member since 2018, and in those few years I've had physical meetings before COVID, and they were termly, with a few subcommittee meetings that I got involved with. Usually twilight meetings at the education offices in Warwick, and currently, of course, done virtually using Microsoft Teams. And each meeting's about 1 to 2 hours. So I started as a co-opted member with no voting rights, and the previous rep, Peter, who handed on to me, he let me know, he sent me a copy of an email that he had sent months previously requesting full representation for himself, but nothing had happened. So after I'd been on the committee for a while, I requested full representation and was told by the chair that she would deal with it, but actually nothing happened. Humanists UK all the while said they would be willing to intervene, but obviously it would cost them money legally to do anything. The legal ramifications are quite interesting. The UN human rights says that no one should be discriminated against on the basis of their religious belief, and so the legal cases that were going forward were using that rule but twisting it to say should neither be discriminated against because of their non-religious belief. And that's what's happening up and down the country when it goes to law, and certainly in Wales it's had a lot of success with that. So I then went back to the chair and she said she would contact SACRE, the National Association of SACREs. And I thought, I know that's not the route. So I emailed county councils. I found their names on the internet who had responsibility for their local SACRE. I emailed them all. Only 2 replied to say they'd left the committee. And I was a little bit upset because there was one councillor who used to attend our meetings and she actually didn't reply to me at all. So I fired my last bullet and emailed the leader of Warwickshire County Council, the busiest person of all. Hurrah! She contacted the education lawyers and asked them to draw up the paperwork, which was needed to basically to alter the constitution of SACRE, and then it gets passed to the council to be voted on. So I'm in that stage now of that paperwork's been done, and I'm just waiting to hear that I'm a full member. But I believe the council's very busy at the minute with budget matters and dealing with COVID, so it might not happen quickly, but excuse me, everything's in place hopefully. So, as I say, I'm here to persuade you. I'm sure you wouldn't have that difficult start to get yourself made a proper member. So in trying to encourage you, I've just drawn up a little list really that came into my head. Bonuses of being on Warwickshire SACRE. Well, I hope you think this is important. It helps to get the humanist message out there, number 1. Secondly, in Warwickshire, we have Jennifer Jenkins, who is the RE facilitator. That's the new name for an RE coordinator. And she is excellent and genuinely welcomes humanist input. And then she interfaces with all the schools and the RE teachers. Also, some interesting things. We've visited a Gurdwara and a mosque with other SACRE members, and I've learnt more about religions. And those visits involve food, which was very nice. A Celebrant colleague and myself, he's here tonight actually, hi Bob, did a webinar session for teachers on humanism, and that was recorded and it's available in all Warwickshire schools. So bit by bit, it's just kind of a drip feed thing, getting humanists out there, and it's so much easier having an RE facilitator who's up for that and genuinely wants to hear from humanists. I've also attended some joint meetings with Coventry SACRE, and this is, yeah, actually that's because a lot of the faith representatives on the Warwick SACRE are the same as the ones on the Coventry SACRE. Anyway, this has led to a lot of things like being involved with the Coventry Peace Project. And more recently, I had a meeting with people that were doing something for the Coventry City of Culture 2021. So it's all interesting stuff, actually. How much time have I got left, Sarah?
I think you can have another minute if you want to.
Right,
say a little bit more.
Just to say, I should have explained at the beginning, really. The reason why the SACREs have to tell schools in the area what syllabus to teach is because there is, I'm sure you're all aware, there is no national curriculum for RE, and the government a few years ago set up a commission to have a look at what should be taught, and the commission, I think it had about 18 members from religions, non-religions, and all of them jointly decided that a non-religious worldview should be taught. However, the government has never actually implemented that as law. Fortunately, most SACREs up and down the country do put forward a syllabus with a non-religious worldview, and very often they come to humanists for that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So that was a very brief kind of insight into the world of SACREs. There are a lot of gaps gaps, as Jane said, across the West Midlands in SACRE representation. I know we're very lucky to have a brand new SACRE rep coming into Birmingham, so thank you to Richard. But it's not without its challenges. It's not without, there are issues everywhere in terms of how humanism is perceived and the value attached to that, as Jane said. So it's an interesting place to be, I think, and it's really important that somebody else has put in the chat that they're also a SACRE rep, that people join up and link up and support each other so that we can understand what those issues are. We're sticking with children, and our next speaker is going to be Brian Goredema-Braid, who's recently trained as a school speaker. So he's going to tell us a little bit about that process and how to become a school speaker.
Yeah, I recently trained as a school speaker. I've been a humanist for over 30 years, and I've always been a bit fed up of being what I would call an armchair humanist. And I think it's important that humanists go out and do things. Having worked with young people all my life as a teacher and as a youth worker and as a university lecturer, I thought that school speaker would probably be one of the best opportunities for myself. Unfortunately, the difficulty was every time I applied for the course, the training course, it clashed with something else I was doing. So it took me about nearly 2 years to get on the right course. And lo and behold, I got on the course in Leicester last May. Wonderful, nothing else on that day, all prepared to go until obviously the pandemic hit us. So it was put off again. And I joined the course in the online course in September. It was a very interesting course, but the thing about an online course is that I think you do miss out something. You miss out the direct interaction with people. It's not just the learning part and the knowledge that comes out of the course, but it's also the interaction you have with fellow students over lunch, etc. And just a general thing, and just obviously building up things and the networking, which obviously the online course couldn't. But nevertheless, it was an interesting course. Before the course, I had to complete an online activity, recording my own thoughts and motivations of why I want to become a school speaker, my attitude and approach to classroom interaction and dilemmas and the principles which may be considered either helpful or unhelpful or borderline issues, and an awareness of some of the tricky questions that may come up. And also prepare an outline of a presentation, which I was to do to fellow students. The course was led by Luke Donnellan, who I'm sure some of you know, who looks after school speakers, and with technical support from Rhiann Jones. Basically, it was a welcome and introduction with an overview of the course, the training aims, the agenda, its exploration, etc., and expectations, and also the core knowledge, the discussion of what we want students to learn. And obviously, there's not much you can do. If you're just talking for an hour, you can't more or less throw the whole of humanism into an hour. So it's what aspects we can actually put in. And what we wanted, and also then Luke gave a demonstration of humanism at work in the classroom and how to make use of issues like visual aids, etc., the interactions with the students and so on, and how to introduce some of the aspects of it to get this, rather than being just talking at students, that it should be more or less coming from the students themselves, that they are actually coming up with a lot of the issues they want to ask and so on, and just pointed some dilemmas in over their way, etc. We then did the presentations to each other, and obviously we were very critical of each other and supportive at the same time, I'm pleased to say, in the breakout groups, and also how to respond to some tricky questions that one might get asked. And also finally we finished up with looking at all the resources that are available, and I was absolutely amazed of what is available. There's a great wealth of knowledge and information on the website, which Rhiann looks after quite comprehensively, and also which this does help with the planning and delivery with schools, aiming at either with a junior school or whether it be a senior school. the processes of fulfilling requests from teachers and way to reach out to schools, and also then evaluating the experience and reflecting on what the training process brought. Despite it being online, it was nevertheless an excellent course, and I gained a lot from that. However, the downside has been that there aren't many schools around to do for me to practice on. I was very fortunate that my colleague Jane, who just spoke, has also she had a couple of online schools lined up to do some teaching, and asked if I wanted to join, which was a great experience. And more as acting as a backup to Jane on the first one, and it was a great experience. Even if it was a junior school, great experience, good rapport with the youngsters and so on. And but then the second school we went to, Jane gave me the opportunity of leading, and where she acted as my backup. So it was a good start. And that was in November, I think, the last one we did. So, but unfortunately, then, the schools haven't been open very much since then. So I don't know when it's all going to come together. I did wonder when I was asked to do this, I wondered why they asked me, because I've got nothing to really add about what it's like in the classroom with a group of children. I've not got many anecdotes to share, I'm afraid. But I'm sure if you will come and ask me again in about a couple of years' time, I'm sure I'll have lots of stories to tell. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. I think we asked you because you had that very recent experience of the training. And if people are interested in school speaking, that would be the first step. So it's good to hear that. Yeah. I think so. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's important for all of these things to say that there is training available through Humanists UK and other sources. And actually, it's not an automatic thing that you are able to then become a speaker or something like that. There is a process that you have to go through, and you do have to be approved by Humanists UK. So they're not going to throw you out. If you're worried about whether you're going to be good enough, you will have gone through a process with them for them to say, yes, we think you're ready. I am also a school speaker, and I think it's probably the favourite thing that I do, because just young people are amazing, really. I have some wonderful experiences. I've done a couple of remote Zoom lessons for GCSE RE students recently, but for the last couple of years, I've also been a school speaker for the Faith and Belief Forum, and that's really definitely recommend looking at that if you're interested in school speaking. So there's a Humanist UK route, but there's also the Faith and Belief Forum, and they have a slightly different model. So as a Faith and Belief Forum school speaker, you'll go in to a school with people of other faiths and beliefs. So you have a panel. There's usually 2 or 3 people on the panel, but they have different faiths and beliefs. So the young people get to hear different perspectives, different beliefs, and it's an opportunity to kind of role model dialogue and respect for difference to children, as well as teaching them about humanism. So my favourite experience, I think, was a couple of years ago at a school in Nechells, where when I explained what my explanation of humanism, one young man said to me, wow, miss, that's mad. I've never heard that before. And so many children just don't know that it's possible to not be religious. And if they do, they think it's a negative thing. They've only ever heard it in a negative perspective. I guess, I mean, it depends where you are and where you go and the types of schools that you go into. Certainly with the Faith and Belief Forum, I've had some really interesting experiences of going into Islamic schools, to a residential Islamic school near Kidderminster, where essentially young people are trained to become imams. So that was an interesting experience. But all schools are different needs and different children. But if talking to children and sharing the possibility of being a humanist or just getting that message out there is of interest to you, then I definitely recommend school speaking.
Thank you.
So I'm going to hand over now to Simon Nightingale, who is very engaged in dialogue work. Thank you, Simon.
So what's so great about dialogue, and why do Humanists UK want us to do it? And anyway, what is dialogue? Humanists' websites say that dialogue is engagement between people with different approaches to life in order to build mutual understanding, to identify common ground, and where it makes sense, engage in shared action. So meet people different from us, understand each other, agree where we can, and work together. So that's what it is. Now, my namesake, Florence Nightingale, wrote a famous book called Nursing What It Is and What It Is Not. Now, I've told you what dialogue is, but this is what it's not. Dialogue doesn't just mean finding common ground. Mutual understanding means acknowledging differences and disagreements, hopefully without a punch-up. We try and disagree well, okay? We call that good disagreement. And dialogue doesn't mean failing to challenge harm done by religious people, or harm done by non-religious people, or harm done by humanists. Everybody is against harm, though we may bicker a bit about what's harmful and what isn't. And dialogue doesn't mean debate. It's not about winners and losers. Of course, if it was, we'd win, obviously. But of course, that's exactly what they say as well. Now, I expect that some of you, like me, may have an inner demon that has to put everybody right about everything. My family tell me this is extremely irritating. I do find it very hard not to challenge every bit of nonsense. Like many people who lost their faith, I spent many years as an angry atheist, and I used to take perverse pleasure in telling religious people that everything they thought was important in their life was a load of rubbish. Especially John, my lovely long-suffering brother, a Church of England vicar, constantly attacked by his really horrible kid brother. But you know, these religious people were actually much nicer and much happier than I was, and also more understanding and more tolerant. It's really very embarrassing looking back on it. And I changed when I became a humanist. I was still worried about the harm done by religion, but then so are religious people. They don't like harm done, particularly by other religions. It's always easier to see the errors of other people. But I came to realize that many religious people felt that their faith made them happier and better, and they saw the same extending into their families and into their communities. I mean, what's not to like? I just felt that as a humanist, I could lead a good life and be a good person without religion. It's not always easy, but it's important, and that's why we all try, whether we're religious or not. So, okay, I've told you what dialogue is and what it is not, but why do we do it? What's the point? Well, there are several reasons. I mean, one obvious one is to ensure that humanism is understood by people of faith, because many of them believe all sorts of weird stuff about humanism. And it's also important for us to understand them better, because we too have many misconceptions and prejudices. And then I guess dialogue also allows us to work with others to make the world a bit better. For example, a group of us in Shrewsbury Interfaith Forum recently set up a Shropshire-wide interfaith climate group. Shropshire Humanists have joined a local multi-faith coalition against modern slavery. We support some local religious organisations such as the Ark for the Homeless and the Food Bank, and we work for a better RE in our multi-faith SACRE. Okay, so dialogue's important, but I'll tell you why I do it. I really enjoy it. I've made some seriously good friends among religious people I'd normally never meet. I've really enjoyed our discussions, and when you've got to know them well, you know, you can talk about really quite sensitive beliefs and values. A year ago, my next door neighbour, Peter, through that wall there, he's an evangelical Christian, and he and I had a public discussion on where do we get our moral values. 250 people turned up. It was very interesting and great fun, and we've also talked to each other on Radio Shropshire. Some of us go to local interfaith forums in Shrewsbury and South Shropshire. There's also a place called the Universal God Centre, and through these organisations we help to run discussions and social events and multicultural events. During lockdown, I've joined a buddy system, and I've spent many very interesting and enjoyable evenings chatting to a Hindu in Watford, and more recently a Baha'i in Birmingham. And we talk about religion and our worldviews and cultural stuff and personal stuff and even spiritual stuff. It's very interesting and it's fun. Now, if you want to do dialogue, think about doing the Humanist UK one-day free dialogue course. Okay, it's online. It's run by Jeremy Riddell, and I help him. It's interesting and helpful and great fun. And it gives you the skills and confidence to start engaging in dialogue. And if you want to know more, just look at the top of the chat and there's some details about it there. Sarah, you've been on that course, haven't you?
I have been on that course. It was very good. I do recommend it. Yeah, thank you, Simon. And again, with that course on dialogue from Humanists UK, it is a process that you have to go through. So you're not automatically approved to do that. So that, you know, Humanists UK will talk to you, make a judgment on whether you're ready to do that, to take on that role. You can, on a personal level, you can do that. But to say that you're from Humanists UK, you need to be accredited by Humanists UK. Again, the Faith and Belief Forum do interfaith work, and I know that some of us have been involved in a Faith and Belief Forum dialogue group that's been happening in January and February. Right, moving on to our very next speaker, who is Pete Bispham. I'm terrible at pronouncing your surname, Pete. I'm sorry.
Yes, all right, Bispham. Yeah.
Pete is a humanist pastoral carer, member of the chaplaincy team at QE Hospital in Birmingham. Thank you, Pete.
Right, I'm just going to talk about how I came into it. 2016, the BHA were advertising for pastoral carers, so I applied for the course. Quite a rigorous application. The application form, telephone interview before we had to go on the course. But before I say any more, perhaps I ought to define what pastoral care is in a couple of words, really. Put fairly simply, it's a conversation between two people that will hopefully lead to self-realization, hope, and well-being. That's a very short explanation. The course concentrates on the skills required to do this, and this is done through lectures, role plays, and group interactions. Now, going on what other people have said, the course is absolutely excellent. On the course I was on, there was 12 participants and 4 trainers, and it was virtually continual assessment. And as Sarah said, you don't just need to go on the course to be accredited, you have to be approved. And 1 or 2 people on the course I was on were refused for various reasons. But the course was held over 2 days in a hotel function room, very full days. It was preceded by pre-course reading, which in those times was a book by a chaplain called Miranda Threlfall-Holmes and Mark Newitt. It was a good book worth reading, but it was religious, basically, because there wasn't any books on humanist pastoral care. But I'm glad to say there is now an excellent book by David Savage, who was head of pastoral care for a while. It's called Non-Religious Pastoral Care, A Practical Guide. It's available from all usual places. The course was extremely enjoyable and very high quality, and it was inspirational to meet other people who were like-minded, and there's some great debate and lots of fun, especially when the wine started flowing at dinner. Now, the journey from being accredited to working in a hospital took me almost a year, but it was well worthwhile. First step was to write to the head chaplain. He replied very quickly, and he got me in for an informal chat. And this was with him and another colleague who were both Anglicans. We explored humanism in quite some detail, and I was questioned about my motivation and so on. They invited me to become a hospital volunteer, which meant I was managed by the hospital voluntary services. I had to train again with them after I had another interview. So in all, I had 3 interviews. Now, I was accepted as a volunteer, but before I could actually see patients, I had to wait 6 weeks for a 6 weeks NHS chaplaincy volunteers course. Interesting, I was the only non-religious person on that course. But I have to say the course was not in any way overtly religious, and one person was asked to leave as expounding Christian extremist views. After that, I had to complete the hospital's mandatory training: infection control, health and safety, data protection, fire, prevent, everything. And when that was finished, I shadowed the existing chaplains from all faiths for about 6 weeks before I was let loose on the wards. I had a base ward, and when I went in, I was provided with a list of patients to see. After a year as being a volunteer, managed by voluntary services, I was given an honorary chaplaincy post, which gave me all the rights and responsibilities of a paid chaplain. I had my own database access, I make my own lists, I target whichever patients I want to see. And this is based on the premise that people in hospital are entitled to care from like-minded people, and that non-religious people should have the right to be visited by people who have the same views as them. However, as all chaplains do, I visit people of all faiths. Now, no 2 days in the hospital are the same. It's a great privilege to meet people from all walks of life when they're most vulnerable. Some conversations are very deep, exploring the meaning of life and death. For example, I was visiting a patient on a 4-bed ward, and a relative called me over and asked if I would speak to her sister. She was near death and very afraid. She told me she was afraid to die because she was going to go to hell. She was a Catholic, actually. I asked her why she thought this, and she told me that when she was a teenager, she didn't speak to her mother for 2 years and had broken a commandment. We talked for a while and concluded that she had had her hell through her suffering with her cancer. I asked her if she knew what it was like before she was born. The answer was no, so we concluded she wouldn't know what it was like after she died. That's a very abridged version of the conversation. It was quite long. A few hours later, the relative came to find me and thanked me for putting her sister's mind at rest. She said that it really helped her and she was ready to face death without fear. Other conversations are quite mundane, discussing football, television, but I've come across loads of interesting people. I've supported people through the wait for organ transplants. They tend to be in hospital for a long time. I've worked with a patient from 100 miles away who couldn't have visitors, and he was taken down to the theatre 3 times to receive a new heart. And each time the new heart was found to be faulty and he couldn't have it. So you can imagine the trauma he was suffering. He did get a heart eventually and went home. I came across a young girl who was a heroin addict. She's about 25, 26, heroin addict, about to have her leg amputated because she'd been using the leg as an injection site. We had a conversation and she told me that her partner had died of an overdose 6 months previously. She said that she could have saved him if she'd been with him, and asked her what she would have done, expecting her to say, I would have called an ambulance or tried artificial respiration. But she said, I would have had half the heroin for him. Yeah, amazing. I was called to a 94-year-old man who had no family. He wanted to tell his life story. It was fascinating, although very slow. He spoke very slowly and deliberately. After an hour and a half listening to him in great detail about his life, he hadn't even reached the First World War. He slipped into his last sleep with a smile on his face, so it was good. And recently I was called to an end-of-life situation where I was able to help a daughter and a granddaughter to say goodbye to their mother and grandmother. It was a long journey, but I would thoroughly recommend it. It's probably one of the best things I've ever done. Being part of a multi-faith team is extremely satisfying. I'm able to give the humanist perspective in team meetings and informal chats over coffee and so on. My hospital is very accommodating. I know all hospitals aren't quite the same, but we're getting there. We're working on it. Now, to go along with that, there's lots of support available. If you choose to go for it, lots of support available. There's an online forum. There's webinar supervision offered every couple of months. And there's always advice on the phone if it's needed. There's also a pastoral support hub on the Humanists UK website, which is some fabulous resources. And I am lucky because I get support from my chaplaincy team as well. But there are also regional coordinators who are available for support and advice. I really would encourage people to put humanism into action and perhaps try training as a pastoral carer. It can be extremely challenging, but it is really very, very rewarded. There's huge satisfaction being with people who are going through difficult times and sometimes supporting them as their life ends. Now, unfortunately, there are no planned training courses at the moment because Humanists UK insists quite rightly the training should be face-to-face and not on Zoom. The current head of non-religious pastoral care, Jessica Grace, left her post today. Her replacement is Claire Elkin-Webber, and she takes up her post in mid-April. If you've got an interest in training, which I would highly recommend, you can register with the training at humanist.org.uk. I think it's probably in the chat somewhere. If you've been a member of Humanists UK for a year, the course is free. Otherwise, it's £225. And if anyone wants to contact me, ask any questions by email or phone, I'll be very happy. But I just say, if you enjoy people, it's an excellent way to share your skills and promote humanism in a multi-faith environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete. That's really interesting. It's quite a big role, isn't it? It is certainly not something to be entered lightly, but obviously very rewarding. That's really good to hear. Thank you. So our final speaker is Mark Taylor. So Mark is a humanist funeral celebrant and coordinator of the West Midlands Celebrants network. I think we also have some wedding celebrants amongst the crowd as well, but so if you've got questions about that, people may be able to answer them later, but for now we're going to focus on funeral celebrancy. Thank you, Mark.
Right, well, hello. Let's just put my papers up, that's better. Right, well, I'm a humanist funeral celebrant, as has been said, and coordinate the West Midlands Celebrant Network. That was an accident, coordinating the network, but it is quite fun. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the training and being a celebrant, and you'll have to forgive the limits of my experience to just one area of celebrancy. I haven't been a celebrant for all that long. It's about 2 years since I began the application process for training with Humanists UK, and it's just over a year since I started practicing. They've been an interesting couple of years in several different ways, as you might well imagine. I've learned a great deal, and I'm really glad I took the plunge and applied. So why did I do it? Well, initially it was because my wife and other people told me I'd be good at it, and they gently pushed me to start. I've been reading a little bit about humanism and knew it matched my philosophy and understanding of life, similar to many of you. I researched the different ways to train as a celebrant, and I was a bit shocked at the cost of the Humanists UK training. However, when I read what was in the course, I realised it was the only one that would give me all the skills and the confidence that I would need. And I wasn't wrong in that assessment. I'm not going to say much about the training other than that it was comprehensive and excellent. I met a lovely group of people, and we've all stayed in touch, which has been very useful. We've been very supportive of each other as we've got on the road of celebrancy. None of us have any doubts that we made the right choice. Now, I feel really privileged to be able to do this work. The feeling you get from meeting the families, working with them and taking the ceremonies is absolutely amazing. And probably a bit like Pete, who's just been telling us about chaplaincy, you find out the most amazing things about people. It's like poking around in somebody's attic. And I'm endlessly amazed at people. And that might not sound so surprising, the fact that I enjoy doing this, if I talk about weddings or namings, but it's just as true for funerals. Don't just take my word for it. Ask any celebrant. Most funeral directors really care about their clients. They try hard to match clients and celebrants, and what they want to see is a good ceremony. Most of them also know that if they engage a humanist celebrant, they will get a good ceremony and their clients will be pleased. I love chatting to funeral directors, but that's a whole other talk. So are there any wider benefits to celebrancy? Well, we know that humanism is a way of thinking and living that's beneficial personally and for the wider community and society. We also know that there are many people who might be interested in humanism, but have yet to discover it. Now, I'm not an evangelist. I don't want to go about preaching the benefits of humanism, especially to people who might not want to know. However, since I've been working as a celebrant and as a school speaker, I've spoken to a lot of people about humanism. What struck me is the number of people who've said, I didn't know anything about humanism until I went to a humanist wedding or a humanist funeral, and I was really interested. After one funeral that I'd taken, someone told me that he'd taken his interest further and signed up for the free online course, which I'm sure all of you have done too. So, as well as working with the families concerned with weddings, funerals, namings and so forth, it turns out that quite accidentally we're also spreading the word. Now, from a very small survey that I took last month of the Midlands Humanist Celebrants, I found out that of those who responded, the majority have trained within the last 5 years, although there are a lot of them who've been working for more than 10. There are similar numbers of wedding and funeral celebrants, and quite a lot who do namings as well. Weddings and naming celebrants have been doing very little work in the last year, which obviously in the COVID situation isn't surprising. They've not been allowed to work. It's more complicated for funeral celebrants. Some have taken more and some fewer. For some, it's been their decision to take fewer to protect themselves and their families. For some, there have been fewer requests, and there's scope for a lot more research there. I know some anecdotes told to me by funeral directors, but I don't know whether half of what they tell me is true. I can also tell you about that half of the requests for ceremonies are for humanist ones, and about half are for non-religious. I'm not quite sure about that. How you handle non-religious ceremonies as opposed to humanist ones is a more complicated issue than we can discuss now. And we've talked about that quite a lot in our meetings with the Celebrant Network, and there's no single answer. You just have to find your way through that one. So to sum up, there's always room for more celebrants, as long as they're not funeral celebrants in my patch. It's a lot easier to do than you might imagine. The training is brilliant, and the rewards in terms of feelings of personal fulfillment are immense. It's bizarrely, it's just something I love doing. Sarah, back to you.
Thank you, Mark. I don't think you're bizarre at all. I think that's good that people love doing that. Right, thank you. So that's our 5 speakers. Hopefully you've heard something that has inspired you possibly to think about doing something else yourself. If you're not in a position to do more yourself, or you're already very active, obviously that's fine, but we're also helpful to think about how we within local groups can support the practitioners that are out there. So how can we support new people to get involved in becoming a practitioner, and how do we support the practitioners that are already out there within our local groups? So we're going to go back into our small groups just for 5 minutes, just for a little bit of a chat about what you've heard, about any, if you're inspired, try to connect with people that have had experiences that might be useful to you. And then we're going to come back into the main room for some questions. Now this, I know in the past we've asked groups to come up with questions. This will probably be more personal questions, because we actually want to hear questions from people who are thinking of taking on a role, so want to ask probably a very personal question about what it might mean for them, or some of those details. So we'll ask you to come back in and individually you can put some questions into the chat for us. We'll have 20 minutes for questions, because we do need to wrap up by 9 o'clock, but we might not get through all the questions, but we'll try and cover a balance across the 5 different areas of practice that we've talked about. Okay, so have a think if there's anything holding you back from becoming a practitioner. Think about what that is. What are the barriers that you see? What are the practical barriers? What are the barriers in terms of your own confidence, or whether you think that's something you'll be able to do? Just have a think about that. And then we've got the right people to ask some questions of where you go from here if you're inspired to do more. Thank you. Simon, are you going to do the breakout room thing again, please? Right, I think we're all back. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a nice chat. So anybody who's got any questions for our panel of speakers, please pop them in the chat, either questions to one particular speaker or to the whole lot, depending on what you want to ask. I'm going to start by asking a question of mark? Because I'm interested to know. When I've had a really bad day at work, so obviously I'm thinking about alternative career options. Is it possible to actually make a full living by being a celebrant?
I think the answer to that, to be honest, has to be no. I have retired, and because I've only been doing it a couple of years, I haven't actually made that many contacts amongst the funeral directors. I'm doing about 2 or 3 a month, 2 or 3 ceremonies a month, which is as many as I'm happy to do, because being retired is not a full-time thing, and I want to do other things too. Well, you know, I charge £200 for a funeral, so 2 or 3 a month, you can do the maths. No, you know, there are people who make a living from it, but I think you've got to really, you know, work hard at it, and it's a lot of work. You know, it takes me probably 2 days to put a funeral together, at least 2 days. So no.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Wahid for Pete about chaplaincy in hospitals. Do you have to see only non-religious people, and is it a full-time job, or can you fit it around a full-time job?
No, we see people of all faiths and no faiths. There are paid full-time chaplaincy jobs available. I'm not a full-time paid chaplain. I do 1 day a week, and I've been doing it for just under 5 years now. Occasionally it's more than 1 day if I get called in for a particular purpose, but all chaplains see people of all faiths and none. But in my position, my chaplaincy manager lets me go on the database and find everybody who's identified as agnostic, humanist or atheist, and I can go and specifically visit them. That answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, can I just butt in there, Pete? What percentage of people are non-religious?
Yeah, this week I went into the hospital. There are 1,400 beds in the hospital, and I found 15 people on the database who'd identified as non-religious.
Wow.
However,
religious people get sick more easily then.
Must do. Well, you know, having said that, you can go to people who've identified as Roman Catholic, Sikh, and when you begin to talk to them, you find they're not actually religious at all. They've just put it down on the form because that's what you do, C of E. You know, which hopefully the census campaign will help to stop that.
Yeah. So a question from Nick, who doesn't really understand the importance to other people of rites of passage, such as namings, weddings, funerals. Can any of the speakers tell me what it is about these ceremonies that makes them so important to other people? Oh, interesting question.
Well, I would say that I don't fully understand what's so important about ceremonies, except that they are important. And there's something that people want to do, and it's actually something I was writing about today because I've been asked to write a piece from a funeral magazine. But people do. It's universal. You know, if you watch David Attenborough, or you know, anthropologists, or you know, people, they talk about how wherever they go in the world, people want to mark ceremonies, and it just is. And as I say, I don't understand it, but you just have to accept that people very much want to mark those ceremonies. Birth is a very important ceremony, so you know, the naming or the christening, baptism, you know, for the religious, marriages are very important, and who doesn't enjoy a good wedding, you know, for all sorts of reasons. And then people want to mark death and celebrate that. I think you can be left feeling very empty if you've not participated in the funeral of somebody close to you. For the religious people, it's a ritual that's of vital importance because it smooths the passage of their particular loved one into the afterlife. Well, obviously we don't think in that way, but nevertheless, we still want to celebrate knowing the person that we lived, that we knew, and the life they lived.
When the naming ceremonies, when you stand in front of those people, wall-to-wall smiles, fence-to-fence smiles, depending where you are, I think you're standing in the footsteps of the first caveman who went out of the cave and held the baby up and said, "Look what we've got, look!" And, you know, you're just rejoicing with the family, with the community at the new birth. When you come to the wedding, again, face wall-to-wall, fence-to-fence smiles and joy, people chuffed at having been invited to this bit of a do. These two people have found love. It's glorious. When you're at a funeral and you meet the family, our families are different because our ceremonies are different because we take time to go over the life carefully of the person who's passed away, remembering them, particularly the golden moments. Usually that's possible. With some it's difficult, but usually you do. And telling that story, deciding what the narrative is about that person, it's a wonderful, special thing. And of course, the more you spend in your community with the different families, the more they get to know you and you get to know them. On Thursday, I'm doing a ceremony for the England netball team manager who lived in Coventry, was a neighbour of mine, passed away. Family have asked me to do it. I don't think that they've got a religious idea or a non-religious worldview either, but you become trusted in the community. So this thing about should I do it is I think about, are you good at telling stories? Are you good at telling the story about the couple who met and have had a baby? Telling the story about the couple who just met and decided to get married? Telling the story about the person who's passed away? And if you are, then it's a bit like that recent Tom Hanks film. I don't know if you've seen it. Where he's a storyteller going from town to town, reading the news out. A wonderful, rewarding role to have for Celebrants.
Thank you, Bob. If I discovered humanism really through ceremonies when I had naming ceremonies for my children, because I wanted to do something to have that rite of passage. And that's where I discovered the great Bible of naming ceremonies written by our very own Jane Wynne Wilson, who has written several books around different types of humanist ceremonies. So thank you, Jane. And if you want to have a look at those, she's written on all the different types of ceremonies that there are. Question from Dave for Pete: how many humanist chaplains here? Do you mean in this room, in this Zoom, or in life generally?
I couldn't say how many in the room, but nationally, currently there are 250 accredited people, and we operate in about 45% of hospitals at the moment.
Yeah,
So
I was just thinking how many in this sort of meeting as a rough guess.
Simon is, yeah.
Oh, Simon is, okay.
And I'm the only one in our hospital. I don't know if Simon is as well.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason I say this, I actually got asked to do this a couple of years ago, completely out of the blue, without any warning at all. Sort of got me interested on that. There was an atheist couple where one of the partners was dying, and two females, when I say a couple, and I don't think any of the religious chaplains wanted to touch it. That's why they asked us from the local humanist group. Had no training, I just went in off the cuff, making it up as I went along almost. But there you go.
There's definitely a need out there. So Tony is asking about prison chaplaincy. Is it a similar process, Peter, and is there as much red tape
Yeah.
to do that? Do you know?
Training does cover that, but it's a much longer process, because you've got to go through the national something for offenders. You have a year's training. You have to be security vetted, and you also have to do anti-manipulation training after you've been accredited as a pastoral carer. So it's a very long process, and as far as I know, there are not many humanist pastoral carers in prisons, because a chaplain's role in a prison is statutory, and all prisoners have to see a chaplain on arrival, and it does tend to mainly fall to full-time religious chaplains. Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Lawrence is asking about school speaking. What kind of things are usually covered in lessons? I think it depends on what the teachers need or want from you and why you've been invited in. So my experience of two main things really. One is for GCSE RE students who specifically need to hear a non-religious view on the items on their GCSE curriculum. And the other one, as I said earlier, I've been doing some work with Faith and Belief Forum, where that really is often around interfaith week, or it's linked to the school's kind of British values approach. It's about getting people with different voices in the room for children to have those experiences of being exposed to different world views. Yeah, so, and I don't know, and yeah, we've got lots of other school speakers here, I'm sure, that have got different experiences of what you talk about when you go into schools. So Humanist UK website. Sorry, carry on.
It's all right. It's Tag here, Sarah. I was just going to say, just to back up what you were saying about it, very much depends on what the teacher is looking for. It may be that they are wanting to complement material that they've had to cover in other aspects of the RE curriculum. It may be that they're interested in starting a debate to kick off a particular unit of work. One of the nice things about school speaking is that it can be very varied, and to underline what was said earlier on, the range of materials that are available for school speakers to draw on, from animation, short films, videos, people with humanist beliefs being interviewed and speaking about it. There's a whole range of material that you can draw on to put together a really lively session for any age group of young people, and it's organized so that you can tune it to the various age phases within education. But the starting point will generally always be the request from the teacher for what they're specifically looking for. Yeah,
those resources on the Understanding Humanism website are excellent.
Brilliant.
All tiered up for different topics, different age bands, lots of different types of resources. Really, really good stuff. Huge thank you to all of our speakers for sharing your experiences with us. I hope some of you at least, have been inspired to think about doing something new, or to support other people to start to do something new, because people need support to have that behind them, to feel confident to step into some of these roles, I think, because they're not always easy, but they are extremely valuable. Excellent way of promoting the existence of humanism, so supporting non-religious people to recognise that they may find some value in humanism and being part of the humanist network, and really important that non-religious people receive the type of support and information that they need. So please do give a lot of thought to whether there is anything else that you can do as a practitioner or within your local group, just to make sure that we stay viable and vibrant. Thank you, Simon, for sorting out breakout rooms and technical stuff. Thank you. So last week is our final meeting of West Midlands Humanist Month, and we have Andrew Copson back with us again. We're going to be talking about the future of humanism. So we're going to pull things together to look at the longer term of where we're going as a humanist movement. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you and good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Stay well. Keep safe.
Yeah, good night.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.